sclerosis, those things begin to adversely affect them in other ways. What happens when somebody gets diagnosed as epilepsy? What's the first thing they want to pull away from them? Their driver's license. The first time somebody has a seizure, that's the first thing they want to do is start pulling the driver's license. So you want to be very, very careful when you are looking at cases like that you are making sure that you are coding exactly what has been documented. If there's any question about whether it's an actual case of it, you back off and you get some help from the supervisory staff and possibly from the physicians. Because you've got to remember that physicians aren't aware of coding guidelines. They not only aren't aware, they don't want to be aware. That's what the expert of. So when you see something that you know is like a red flag to you, that's your time to go to the supervisor and say, and what do you want me to do in this case? And they may actually have to intervene with the physician, and you may actually have to get some more documentation to make sure you're coding it correctly. All right, now, the next page, rule out versus ruled out. Ruled out is past tense, isn't it? Meaning you thought it might be, but you decided it wasn't. All right, so there's definitely a difference in rule out and ruled out. Rule out means you think they've got it, and you're going to treat them accordingly. So if they're an inpatient at the time of discharge when you get that diagnosis, you code it as if it actually existed. Ruled out, look at the second part of that first line, indicates that a diagnosis originally considered as likely is no longer a possibility. So if it was MI ruled out, are you going to code it as an MI?
No.
No, because it wasn't. We know unequivocally it was not. But if it's an inpatient admission and at the time of discharge the doctor says rule out MI, how are you going to code that?
MI.
As an MI. Okay, now, the second paragraph, diagnoses qualified by the term rule out, code them as if they're established for inpatient episodes of care, same way you did the possible and probable. Next line, if it's described as ruled out, you never code that diagnosis. Instead, you code the signs or symptoms that the patient had. You code whatever they actually did have that you can substantiate them having. Okay, so I came into the hospital for abdominal pain. Rule out appendicitis. So what did they think I had? Appendicitis. When I left, however, they said appendicitis ruled out. What's the only thing left you can code? Abdominal pain. That's the one thing you know I had. Okay, same scenario, only this time they found out that the abdominal pain was due to gastroenteritis. Now what do you code? The gastroenteritis. Do you do anything with abdominal pain? No, why not? It's a sign, or actually the symptom, and it's explained by way of a diagnosis. Yeah, good. Okay, acute and chronic conditions. It's not unusual for a patient to have both the acute and the chronic version of the same diagnosis. For instance, acute and chronic bronchitis. Well, which one is probably the most serious at that particular time? If it's an inpatient admission, which one is probably bringing the patient to the door? The acute is. The acute is. So when you've got the same condition described as both acute or subacute, it doesn't matter, and chronic, it should be coded according to the alphabetic index sub-entries for that condition. Meaning that if you've got acute, look up acute of that condition. If you've got subacute, look up subacute. If you've got chronic, look up chronic. If separate subterms for acute or subacute and chronic are listed, both codes are assigned with the code for the acute condition first. I've got chronic bronchitis, I've got acute bronchitis. I'll look up both of them at the same level of indentation. I've got a code for each one. Which one goes first? Acute. It's just a rule. And if you can remember that rule, you'll always be fine. Now sometimes, well, look at the one for bronchitis. You'll see that's an example of it. Acute or subacute has one code, chronic has another. Which code goes first? Which the 466.0 does, because it's the acute one. All right, the next thing to go over is exercise 6.4. You had a chance to go over it and check yourself? If you got any questions, anything you want me to do to show you how to code something there? Dorothy, you okay with it? Okay. All right, impending or threatened conditions. That's when we feel like something is getting ready to happen, or it's the circumstances are so much and the symptoms so much that we feel like the patient's getting ready to have it. Like a threatened early onset of labor. You know, she's got all the symptoms of going into labor early. It's a threatened labor. So let's take a look at that. Selection of a code for a condition described at the time of discharge or at the conclusion of an outpatient encounter as impending or threatened. Let's break that down. It's either at the time of discharge for an inpatient or at the end of the service for an outpatient. During those two time periods, if you've got something that's stated as being impending or threatened, how you code it depends on whether the condition actually occurred. If it did occur, then of course you code it as if it occurred. Makes sense, doesn't it? A threatened abortion, they aborted, the abortion. Now when I'm talking about abortion in that sense, I'm talking about spontaneous abortion, a miscarriage. All right, so I have a threatened miscarriage, a threatened abortion. I actually did lose the baby, so therefore I'm going to code it as actual spontaneous abortion. Take a look at the third paragraph. If neither the threatened or impending condition nor a related condition occurred, then the coder's got to go back to the alphabetic index to answer the two questions. One, is the condition indexed under the main term threatened or impending? Is there a subterm for impending or threatened? And if so, if there's a term there, then you assign the code provided. All that's doing is saying, if you've got a situation that was threatened or impending, and it didn't happen, then when you go to look it up, you make sure you look to see if there is a code for threatened or impending. And if there is, you're going to use that code. When neither term is indexed, when you don't